Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be in the world. My name is Chris Gentry. I'm a Manhattan Prep instructor for the GMAT, the GRE, and the LSAT. And today we will be talking about the GMAT. Welcome, everybody. If you have the opportunity to participate in the chat, that would be wonderful. In fact, I would welcome any kind of chat response right now just to say hello. As we go through this discussion today for 1 hour about how to score 700 and over 700 on the GMAT, I would welcome questions, comments, concerns at any time in the chat. Do not feel you need to wait for a good moment. Please feel free to contribute at any time. I was testing the annotation tools and the screen display earlier, so some of you may notice, hello Adrian, that we're looking right now at an older picture of me. I think this picture is probably 6 years old. I used to have hair, not so much anymore. That is the way life goes, I suppose, sometimes. Starting off today, if I can, I would just like to get to know a little bit about the people participating today. Hello, Bongali, and hello, Michael. Oh, and by the way, I do try to pronounce names correctly. If I mispronounce your name, I do sincerely apologize. Um, if it is convenient for you to correct me in the chat, I would welcome that. I would like for everyone to just respond to this particular question. A, B, C, D, or E, or if none of these quite describe your GMAT experience, please tell us what does. Have we taken an actual test? Have we taken a practice test? Or are we just beginning our studies? I'll pause here for a moment. Please let me know where we are. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Tushar. Oh, Pravjot, mocks the real test on the 1st of November on Monday, Tuesday. Good luck. Michael. I would be intrigued, Michael. How did you feel about your timing on the test today? And thank you for sharing, by the way. And in fact, I would offer that as a supplement question to everyone participating in the chat. How did we feel about our timing on the test? Did we feel rushed? Did we feel sort of very large swings? I would spend a lot of time in a problem and then very little time. Thank you, Hari. Adrian. Everything's smooth until urgency turns into panic. I would like to do 2 things today. The first thing is I would like to establish a more in-depth understanding of the scoring algorithm. I hope that a more in-depth understanding of the scoring algorithm will encourage us to manage our time with more confidence. In my experience, Last 3 questions in 1.5 minutes. Yes. And if that was a reading comprehension passage, that is very tough. More understanding of the scoring algorithm and how that affects our timing so that we can establish our timing benchmarks with confidence, and also make sure we establish our study plans appropriately, because that can also be intriguing. Then I would like to try a few problems. A particular focus on, I hope to do 1 data sufficiency, 1 sentence correction, and 1 critical reasoning. Again, just a first quick check. There should not be any surprises here. Um, but just as a quick confirmation, everyone is aware that you can do one of 3 orderings of the test. Please do not select choice 1. Do not do the argument, essay, and integrated reasoning first. Start with verbal or quantitative, whichever you feel more comfortable with. What I tell people in terms of choosing select the start section, take a practice test with each order, verbal first, then quant first. Whichever order leaves you with more energy and focus as you close the second section is the best order for you. Nando scored a 710. Well done. At that point, I would say start the rest of your application process. My general recommendation is if you are within 20 to 30 points of the median score of your goal schools, start working on the other components of your application. The only caveat to that might be if you very, very strongly desire Wharton, INSEAD, I believe Columbia also belongs on this list, but Wharton and INSEAD I know belong on this list where they very much prize a high quantitative score. And so you would want to make sure that your quant subscore particularly is very high. Notice I said subscore, not percentile. Jose, verbal always first. That's the way you feel most comfortable. It is good to have that confidence. We'll start here. The most direct understanding of the scoring algorithm. Who gets a higher score? Student 1, student 2, or do they get approximately the same score? I would like for everyone to vote on that. Who gets a higher score, or do they get the same score? Student 2 gets the higher score. Although student 2 never hits the highs of student 1, this test is trying to use foundational math and foundational verbal reasoning skills as a substitute for business case decision making. And if you look at student 1 would be analogous to a business that does very, very well for quite a long period of time, but then starts taking losses and takes all of their losses compressed into one time frame. Like a business that took 5 years worth of financial losses all in the same financial quarter. That would crush a business. Student 2 is meant to be more representative of a business where the decisions resulted in losses occasionally, but you never had so many losses compressed into one time frame that it wasn't harmful to the existence of the business. Student 2 will get the higher score on this. Prabhat, where you end is what you get, question mark. put a period at the end of that. Where you end is what you get. That is the most direct way to understand this process. Let's take a look at a little bit more nuance to this. So let's start then. How the test actually works. At question 1, the computer knows nothing about you, and it must choose to give you a question of difficulty rating ranging anywhere from 6 on the low end to 51 on the high end. Will the computer start you with a question that is at the very low end, the very high end, or close to the middle? Where will the computer start you for question 1? Probably in the middle. It will start you pretty close to the middle. The computer scores by exclusion. It wants to know who you are not. If the computer started us on the low end, we get the question correct. Almost everybody gets the low end questions correct. We look like everybody else. If the computer starts us at the high end, statistically speaking, we would probably get it wrong, and we look like everyone else. The computer has not differentiated us from anyone. The computer starts somewhere in the middle to begin differentiating us from other test takers. So we get this question correct. The computer now knows that it needs to be looking at us somewhere in the upper half. Tanya, at the moment, I hope to teach a more in-depth understanding of the scoring algorithm. Then we'll look at some specific questions. For our second question, will the computer go a little bit into the upper difficulties, all the way to the top of the other difficulties, or the middle of the upper difficulties? Low, middle, or high for the second question. And again, that's low, middle, or high inside the upper half. Where will the second question land? Middle again. The computer will again land this roughly in the middle of the upper section. Because again, it is trying to differentiate us. If the computer now believes we are in the upper half, it wants to differentiate us from other test takers in the upper half. And so it will go in the middle to try and differentiate us from as many people as possible inside the upper half. We get that one right. We go to question 3. Now the computer is looking at us in the upper quarter. Will the computer go low in the upper quarter, middle in the upper quarter, or high in the upper quarter? Where will that third question land? I see middle, I see low, I see low. That third question will land all the way at the top. Sueta, all the way at the top. And if you think about this for a moment, this is very peculiar. That third question is, for all practical purposes, a wasted question. The highest difficulty questions, most people get them wrong. Statistically speaking, we would all get the hardest questions wrong on this test. So we get that hardest question wrong and we look like everyone else. The computer did not differentiate us from anyone. What we're seeing here is where the scoring algorithm has two goals. Usually these work in concert, but here they start to conflict. One goal is to establish an appropriate difficulty level for you and to begin differentiating you from other test takers. The other goal is to find where you miss the questions almost half the time. The scoring algorithm's definition of success is getting a test taker to have a 55% right, 45% wrong score profile. And at the moment, the computer knows that we've gotten 2 right and 0 wrong. Mathematically, we are literally infinitely far removed from the computer's desired score profile, and it will fix that. Now, this will not necessarily happen in the third question. This will not happen only the third question. This happens anywhere in the test. You start to give the computer a very imbalanced profile of right versus wrong. It will fix that. And we want to understand that as test takers. Assume that we get the first 2 questions correct, and we get this monstrously difficult third question. What should we do with that monstrously difficult third question? You get out. What I tell my classes, burn this question with the fire of a vengeful god. Just move on. D means done. Get out. Do not spend an extra minute. Honestly, Satish, on the worst questions, I probably would not even attempt them. And there is a very intriguing reason behind that. You have to keep in mind that this is a multiple choice test. And in every multiple choice test, you have the opportunity to get a question correct because you get lucky. And the algorithm takes that into account. The algorithm will take one of the hardest questions that you got correct and throw it away as an outlier, which sounds evil, but it does the same on the other end as well. It takes one of the lowest questions that you get wrong and throws that away as an outlier. And so you want to look at some questions and say, no, even if I get it correct, it might not be worth the time. Taha, how do you find this question is difficult? Herein lies the issue. I want us to, in our personal establishing questions on this test, don't think the word difficult. Think time consuming. It's less how hard do I think this question is, and more, even if I get it right, how much time will it cost me? And you will see questions on this test that you should look at and say, I probably could get this correct, but at what cost? Venkatesh, now that is a fun question. And I want to be very clear. I'm not saying we do not attempt any hard questions. I'm saying that when we see a time-consuming question, we ask ourselves, is this worth the time? And the answer to that question will occasionally be no. My personal rule, if I see a very time-consuming question and I have not guessed on a question in the last 5, I guess on that question. If I see a time-consuming question, but a question I believe I could do, and I have guessed in the last 5, I have purchased time for this question. This is the way I want us to look at guessing on this test. You are not sacrificing this question so much as you are buying time for later questions. Now, how do we build our score? Here's the other interesting aspect to how the scoring algorithm works. Every score, every question has a curve, a probability curve. This would be the probability curve of a fairly high-level question for people who get it correct. And what you see here is, instead of difficulty rating, this is now probability right versus wrong. And this is the score of the test taker. As the test taker's score goes up, they have a higher probability they get it correct. As the test taker score goes down, they had a lower probability they would get it correct. Every question also has a corresponding probability curve for getting that question wrong. So this same question would have a probability curve that would look something like this. They aren't complete mirror images of each other, but that may be an easy way to think of it. Low scores had a higher probability to get it wrong. High scores had a lower probability to get it wrong. The score for any question is a point called the inflection point, where that graph is steepest. And what the computer does, it takes all of your right questions, gives you the blue graph. All of your wrong questions gives you the red graph, and it integrates all of those graphs together continuously, question by question, to build a Chris Gentry, Taha Mohsen GMAT score graph. And your graph is your score. More specifically, the inflection point of your graph is your score. And so what you want is you want to keep the inflection point high. So that means that if it's a monstrously difficult question, even if you get it wrong, it still has a very high inflection point. It is still a benefit to your score. The biggest thing on this test is making sure that if a question is well within our abilities, when we look at this question and go, oh, I know exactly what to do here, we get those questions correct. When you look at a question, you go, oh, this is tough. This would take me a long time. And even if I spend time on it, I am not sure that I would get it right. That is when we want to make decisions on whether that question is worth it. I'm going to pause here for a moment. Does anyone have further questions that they would like to put in the chat? I will tell you a common question that I get from my students is how many questions I burn, how many questions I guess on. I guess on anywhere from 5 to 8 questions in the quantitative section, and usually 2 to 4 questions in the verbal section. Does anyone have follow-up questions on the scoring algorithm? how the score is built. If you do not have questions, please type no or no questions. Adrian, that is a very common misconception. Um, I can tell you where that misconception comes from. You get a negative feedback loop, if I may use a non-test scoring analogy for this, the reason behind that misconception. People who tend to miss multiple questions inside the first 7, and it's not the first 15, it's the first 7. People who miss multiple questions inside the first 7, you usually have more of those questions that landed at much lower difficulty ratings. Since the computer does not know much about you inside the first 7 questions, when it does difficulty rating swings, those swings tend to be a little bit larger. And if you miss multiple questions inside the first 7, then you tend to have a lot of wrong graphs that look something like this, where your inflection point is much farther to the left. And so that sort of anchors your score and would not allow you to progress beyond that. It's not about the number of questions, Adrian. It's about how hard were the questions that you missed. My rule is inside the first 7, I want to burn 1 quickly. Always inside the first 7. And I use that time to establish another 30 seconds that I can give to 4 other questions to make sure that there are 4 questions inside that first 7 that I am absolutely getting correct. And then I trust my normal timing and the others to make sure that I get 6 out of the first 7 correct. Are there experimental questions? There are on the actual test. There are not experimental questions on practice tests. There are experimental questions. You have 3 experimental questions on quantitative. I believe it's 4 experimental questions on verbal. I would have to go back and look at a student's enhanced score report again to recall that exact number. But you can actually reverse engineer that number from the enhanced score reports for people who have taken the official test in person. There are some experimental questions, which is another reason that you should not worry about burning a particular question. Adrian, have I sufficiently responded to your query about the first 15 quant questions? Nando, what kind of questions might I see in the test if I'm performing very well? The computer does not measure this that way. Everybody sees the same breakdown of how many questions in which content area or how many questions of what category. The computer actually has certain profiles and it must select X number of questions of question type for every test taker. So you would not know by that metric. You would know based on how many, and this is a very difficult thing to do, and I hesitate to even respond to this, but I will say, if you can look at a question and say something like quantitative is where this is easiest to define. This question tests inequalities and quadratics and positives, negatives, and it's asking for factors, so there may be a divisibility concept in here. The more concepts that you can recognize are tested inside one question, the more you can recognize this question would take a long time or is considered very difficult. How to identify a tough question in verbal, because the time you know it is tough, you would have spent 1 minute on it. That is the issue, Hari. And this is why I don't worry over much about this in sentence correction, but there are some guidelines that I can give you for critical reasoning and reading comprehension. Critical reasoning. If it is an accept question, be cautious about how much time you spend on that. An accept question is literally telling you you have to analyze this correctly 4 times over to eliminate the 4 that do the thing. Like, which of the following strengthen except? Well, 4 of these would strengthen. I have to do 4 strengthen analyses correctly to get credit for this question once. Or in a critical reasoning question, if the question is so convoluted that you don't even know what the question is asking. Something like, which of the following, if true, would most strengthen the objection that the proponents offer to the opponent's mention of blah, blah, blah? And you're like, wait, I'm supposed to strengthen an objection to proponents of opponents? How many different directions do I have in this paragraph? That would be a very tough question in critical reasoning. On reading comprehension, my general rule for reading comprehension, if I read the question and I don't even know where to begin looking in the passage to find the answer, I would be cautious about spending any time on that question. Now, reading comprehension is interesting because you have to read the passage in advance. There's no way around that. Hari, I hope that those have given you some general guidelines to how to identify tough questions in verbal. In the ESR, what's the level of a medium or medium hard question in terms of 600 to 650 to 700? That stress that actually that is interesting. That doesn't actually exist. So let's talk about ACE. Everyone take a moment. If this is ACE's score report from a practice test, should ACE spend more time studying quantitative? Should ACE spend more time studying verbal? Or neither? Are both verbal and quant equal for ACE? What should ACE focus on? And Savigya, the answer to your question is yes. Same first 7 question strategy applies for verbal also. Dunia, how do I know if I'm doing well in the middle or end of a section? I'm sorry, you don't. You won't know until you see the score. And you won't know by question type. I'm sorry, I wish I had a more positive answer to that question. I have several people saying quant. Pooja is saying both. Hari is giving me this delightful, all caps, incredibly specific verbal 60%, quant 40%. I would like everyone to respond to this. When you make your decision on quantitative or verbal, are you using the score or the percentile? Is it the score or the percentile that feeds your decision? That's what I was wondering. Don't use percentiles. The percentiles are useless. Taha has possibly heard me say this before or has heard someone else say this before. The percentiles are useless. Let's take a moment. Let's look at why. These are GMAC's own reported score to percentile conversions for quant and verbal. I think you may notice here that on quant, your average score is nowhere close to 50th percentile. In fact, it's 35th percentile. On verbal, your mean average score is pretty close to 50th percentile. But look at what happens up here. You hit 99th percentile out of 45. And yet in theory, verbal scores go up to 51. This tells us we do not use percentiles. And by the way, the overall score is not calculated from your percentiles. You look at quant, 43 out of 51. You look at verbal, 37 out of 46. There is no way to truly plan for a verbal score higher than 45. And so you would look at this and you would say, there are 8 points still achievable in quant. There are 9 points still achievable in verbal. You would want to balance your studies. And so you use your scores and make sure you use that score as a measure out of how many points are possible. The dream is to get 51 in both. Absolutely, Selby, absolutely. This is one of those times where you have to keep in mind, above a 45 in verbal, the computer is literally guessing. You hit 99th percentile at a 45 in verbal. That means that the computer does not have enough test takers scoring above 45 in verbal to make anything above 45 truly measurable. I'll hold here for a moment. Further follow-up questions or concerns about the scoring? All right, I'm going to stop screen share for a moment because I want to advance through in the slides. And there's a lot in the slides that are summation, discussion points, but not actual problems. And I have a feeling that the group would want to see some actual problems now. Michael, oh my goodness, your question, and somebody else asked a similar question earlier. My apologies, whoever asked this similar question earlier. There is no maximum wrong, and there is no minimum right. 650, you will probably get 60% of the questions wrong and 40% of the questions correct. Same for a 550. You would want to make sure that the questions that are definitely achievable, that you do not make careless mistakes. There is no maximum wrong or minimum right. Ish. To get above a 730, realistically, you can probably only miss around 8 in quantitative and probably 4 to 5 in verbal. That's to get above a 730. And I'd like for everyone to please note that I made my benchmark scoring above a 730. There is not much of a way to plan for a score above 730. Scores above 730 rely very heavily on you almost have to get a 49, 50, or 51 in quantitative. A perfect score, 1 point off or 2 points off in quantitative. In verbal, you have to get at 45 or up, and everything above 45 is literally luck on verbal. There is no way to plan for that. Taha, to reach a 50 in quant from 49, that is exceptionally difficult. If you have a 49 in quantitative is done. If you still want score improvements from that, study verbal. You're 2 points away from a perfect score. How do we pace ourselves for verbal? Pacing ourselves for verbal, you take advantage of the fact that the 36 questions in verbal can be evenly divided into quarters. You say every 9 questions, what do I want the clock to say? And you just track yourself against that metric of every quarter, am I on time? And you also take a moment somewhere on your scratch work to track how many reading comprehension passages you've had so that you are not surprised. For example, maybe if you have 2 reading comprehension passages left and they both happen towards the end, You're not going, oh my God, another reading comprehension passage. Oh crap, I forgot I had only done 3. So you track how many reading comprehension passages you have. Amritsi, a verbal 31 and quant 41, you would want to do around 60% verbal, 40% quantitative focus on your studies. All right. Would we like to see a data sufficiency question? I say that as though I'm not going to do that. We are going to see a data sufficiency question. Can I just get a quick confirmation? Because I did stop share and start share again. Do we all see number s is equal to x factorial on the screen right now? I hope we do. Saviga, you do not see this? Try this again. Share screen. Do we see it now? Interesting. Start everything over. Let's do this instead. Do we see now a problem that says number s is equal to x factorial? That is exactly right. I'm going to start everything over in my slideshow here. I've now tried for a 3rd time, maybe 4th time, after closing out the entire presentation. Do we see the problem now? Okay. Abhijit, do you have any advice for me on this? That's what I'm wondering. The problem is, it is a Manhattan Prep question, so I cannot share the link of the question. Wonder. Do we see a blank page? Or do we now see a blank page? Yeah, Sevilla, that's what I'm trying to do. I don't know why this is not working very well here. Do we see the core PowerPoint file? Sevilla, yes, I tried both. I tried sharing the whole screen, and then I tried sharing the individual PowerPoint window. And at the moment, I'm tempted to just share the PowerPoint. Nothing is visible. That's still true? Okay. Do we see anything now? Hmm. Well, my friends, I apologize for this technical issue here. And nothing still. Ah, do we have anything now? My screen just changed. Ah! Somebody's saying yay. Okay. Oh my goodness. Venkatesh, I will gladly answer a question at any time. But in the meantime, I'll give everyone perhaps 2.5 minutes to at least attempt this problem, and we'll revisit in just a moment. I am not going to mess with the screen sharing again. You may just have to watch me click through a lot of slides. Everybody take a few moments. I was just about to say, whenever you have an answer, feel free to send it in now. What I hope to explore in data sufficiency in the next moment or two. In data sufficiency, if there is work that you can do in the prompt, do that work in the prompt. Even if it is just looking to see if we find a pattern. Number s is equal to x factorial. If x is a positive integer, what is the units digit of s? Let's just see some options. Merely at the moment listing out options. If x is 1, 1 factorial is 1. If 2, 2 times 1 is 2. If 3, 3 times 2 times 1 is 6. 4 times 3 times 2 is 24. 5 factorial is 120. 6 factorial would be 720. And we note that at a certain point, our units digit will always be 0. Work in the prompt. My goal for data sufficiency is always I want at least 2 ways to write the question itself. One way, what is the units digit of s? Another way to write the question itself is x greater than or equal to 5? Because if x is greater than or equal to 5, then the units digit would be 0. I would not have known that until I at least try to look and see if there's a pattern. But if I take a few moments, I might discover that. X is odd. Well, that could be 1, 3, or 5. Your units digits could be 1, 6, or 0. So that is not sufficient. X can be expressed as the sum of 2 different prime numbers. Your prime numbers here, 2, 3, 5, 7, etc., etc. Please note, 1 by definition is not prime. So x is at least 2 plus 3. X is at least 5. Statement 2 will be sufficient on its own. The answer would be B. Data sufficiency. 700 plus scores come from doing more work in the prompt than you might even think you need. Now let's take a look at a sentence correction example. I apologize, you will see me flip through some slides. Everybody take a moment. Try this one. I'll give you about a minute to consider. When you have an answer, feel free to go ahead and put it in the chat. I think some answers come in. Sentence correction is about process. Have a checklist of items that you always want to address. I'm seeing a lot of good answers in here, and I believe it is D. I don't usually have these memorized. I try not to have these memorized. First step of the process, subject and verb. Producing and marketing is my subject. Producing and marketing enables. That's an issue. Producing and marketing is plural. It would be a they. You would not say they enables. Producing and marketing enables. The producing and marketing, that's still producing and marketing. Horizontally integrated companies are able. Horizontally integrated companies are able. At this point, we've already checked off the other thing that I noticed immediately. You have this long introductory description that is better served describing horizontally integrated companies. In contrast to vertically integrated companies, horizontally integrated companies. I check down core subject-verb relationships. I check down a few, three types of modifier constructions, description constructions that the GMAT follow rules on. I check down parallelism. We had producing and marketing, which was parallel. But we also have enables horizontally integrated companies to increase and control. And then we see here are able to increase and control, are able to increase and controlled? No. Notice two things here. What I've shown you is sort of a mix of how I attempt versus how I study. Attempt is I want a checklist and I want to just check one item at a time, cross them off wrong. The study is if there are multiple reasons why a choice is wrong, Did I find them all? A, B, C, my studies? There are two reasons that each one is wrong. Sentence correction is about a process, a checklist. Again, critical reasoning. Critical reasoning is about goal statements. And we are a few minutes past 11, but I would like a few more minutes if you would allow me, because we did have those technical issues earlier. Take a few moments, type in your answer when you have it. Yasha, I'll answer your question in just a moment. Seeing some answers come in. Please feel free to let me know either your answer or if you are down to two. It is quite common on critical reasoning for people to be between two choices. Critical reasoning is about goal statements. The argument presupposes which of the following. If my question references the argument, my first goal is the conclusion. Companies should, therefore, allow other manufacturers to license patented technologies. Companies should do something. Almost a statement of moral obligation or an ethical concern. Which one of my answer choices suggests that companies might have a moral or ethical obligation that they should do something? It is in fact B. There is another aspect to this question that you could approach by recognizing that it is a find the assumption question and doing a negation test, but that is a discussion that would require more time than we have today. I hope, Gaijin, why not A? Whether companies can or cannot find legal ways to produce technology, that tells you about what other companies would do. The companies who do not have the patents. The companies who do the patents, they would not care whether they need to find technologies similar to this patented technology. They hold the patent. My conclusion is about what the patent holding company should do. They should allow under the manufacturers to license patented technology. Since I'm getting so many questions, I will say, if you do a negation test, if we negate choice B, this entire argument falls apart. If companies do not have an obligation to act in the best interest of the computer, then companies should not allow other manufacturers to license their technology. There is your negation test for find the assumption. Selby, why not the other options? This is really an issue of I want my goal statement. Before anything else, I want a choice that addresses what companies should or should not do. And only one of my choices brings that up. I hope that you are all challenged by this problem set. I hope that you are all intrigued by this problem set. And I hope that you're seeing, thank you, Sylvie. I hope you are seeing that there is a process for each question type. It won't be perfect, that's not our goal. But there is a process that can carry us very successfully through these questions. I know what for verbal, first 9 questions. I can't read the last part of your chat there. If your question is whether the first 9 questions are more or less important, the first 7 in quant, the first 9 in verbal are neither more or less important in terms of your overall score. They are important in terms of making sure that you do not rush or make careless mistakes. What level of question is this? This is one that we wrote based on my experience with other GMAT questions, which, by the way, I've been doing this since 2011-ish. And so I've seen GMAT questions going back to the 12th edition of the official guide, before they even started giving it year-by-year numbers. I would say that this is right up with 690 to 720 level. Once you have a process for finding the assumption, you can normally get it down to B, but a lot of people are going to have a very tough time between A and B in particular. And so that would amp up the difficulty level on this one. I want to just leave you with an invitation. Manhattan Prep does this. I would imagine most companies do this, but I really strongly encourage you to do this. If you haven't taken a class yet and you're interested in a class, try one. In fact, I encourage you to shop around several class ones if you have the time frame possible. And then feel free to look and see at our starter kits. And thank you very much for your attendance today. Thank you very much for being so participatory in the chat. It makes my job much more engaging, and I've really enjoyed this. I will leave this here, and I will hold here for a moment, see if there are any other questions. But thank you all very, very much, and good luck to all of you. Gaijin, I'm up for another session, but we'll have to see if that's an opportunity. Adrian, summarize my guessing timing strategies. That's a tough ask. I will tell you that I allow myself to drop one question out of every 5 on average. I'm glad you did, Sylvie. One question out of every 5. General expectation is that I will need to dump one in the first 7. After that, it is an idea of, if I'm looking at a question saying this will take me a long time, if I have not burned a question in the last 5, I'm burning that question. Taha, do I read each choice of critical reasoning? I do. And if I find one that I like, I now measure each choice against that liked choice. I think about a new choice against the choice that I like. GMAT in 15 days from today. What should I prioritize? In 15 days, I would say if you're concerned about quant side, prioritize exponent questions, prioritize ratios, percents, fractions, prioritize statistics, questions about medians, means. And again, that list is exponents, statistics, and fractions, percents, ratios on the quant side if you have 15 days. If you have 15 days and your priority is verbal, find the assumption questions in critical reasoning because they have a negation test that you can use. And subject-verb issues in sentence correction. Someone asked earlier, do I have a priority list for sentence correction? My first priority in sentence correction is always, where is the subject and verb? It's called sentence correction. The first step is always know where my sentence is. Yeah, Yasha. Subject verb first, always. I have to know where my sentence is. I have to know where my subjects and verbs are. Then I have 3 levels of priority for specific rule-based structures, modifier structures, parallelism and comparison structures. Our curriculum talks about parallelism and comparison in 2 different chapters, but it's essentially the same thing. And then pronouns. Subjects, verbs, then modifiers, parallelism, comparisons, and pronouns. And after that, I just go by sound, really. But I want to make sure I get those first few right. You are all very, very welcome, by the way, for everyone who says thank you. Nando, which business schools pay attention to, and again, for some reason, there we go, to IR scores. The integrated reasoning scores aren't a large focus of full-time admissions. There's a little bit to that. The only school I know of is INSEAD will occasionally look at an integrated reasoning score as sort of a supplement to your quantitative subscore. I'm glad it helped, Yasha. And you're very welcome, Adrian. Nando, I hope I've answered your question. Most schools are either about overall score in general or overall score mixed with how much of that overall score was based off of a strong quantitative subscore. Most schools don't make the integrated reasoning section the primary focus of their concern. All of them would look at it, but they'd look at it more as an idea of if the integrated reasoning score is really, really low, then they're wondering if you're just somehow flaking out on some of the process. All right, everyone. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much for your patience with the technical issues earlier. I appreciate you all working with me on that and being patient with me for that. I think we do need to close it up here. It has been a wonderful morning for me. I hope it's been a productive morning, afternoon, or evening for all of you. Good luck, everybody. Thank you all very much.